Are we doing an intro or anything like that?
Uh, this is the Disgruntled Crab and Rusty Culture most professional review show!
And there is something to that, though. There's something about those things that we have from when we were younger that you'll never be able to let them go. And then there's other things that you look back on and you're like, what was I thinking? But I know I definitely have things. Like for me, that thing is probably SpongeBob. Like I look back on SpongeBob, especially early SpongeBob, and that's my thing. Whereas I know a lot of people can look at it who were either older or are younger now and say, "Oh, that's stupid." But for me, it just hit at the perfect time, where I was just the right age where I kind of fell in love with it. So I totally get that.
There's a lot of good things in SpongeBob. Probably the first couple of seasons are where it was actually trying to do something different. And
Absolutely.
there's that's another one where there's some just odd humor in that. The one that always gets me is when Patrick and SpongeBob think they have to live out in the wilderness, so they start a fire and they're heating this up. And Patrick's like, "Hey, wait a minute! If we're underwater," and it's poof, it
Yep.
goes out instantly.
Yep.
Hey, if we're underwater, how could there be a.
So yeah, that's an interesting concept to think about is like what are those things and if it happens with media, if it happens with shows and movies, what else in your life does it happen with? That's an interesting question.
And kind of looking back on it, I just there's so many things that they're rebooting and refreshing for the modern era, and there's a lot of times where they treat it horribly. And even if it's something that you haven't thought about in a long time, and you look at it and it's like, wow, that they ruined it, and I didn't even know I cared about it anymore. So that's kind of why I have avoided the live action show because I have no idea if it's good or not, and I can separate and watch the cartoon and it's off in its own little world. Um, the interesting thing is that this was actually based on a comic book, and the comic book was a little more adult.
Hmm.
So there was a little more edgy stuff in the comic that didn't make its way into the cartoon because it was meant for children.
On that note of modernization or rebooting of things, it almost seems like they lose their soul when you do that somehow. You know, like very few things manage to get that right. You know, I can't even the new Top Gun's the only thing I can think of off the top of my mind that did it really well. And I don't know what that is. Is it just because we're older now and we're gonna just hate the new things? I can't imagine it's as simple as that because it does feel like things are missing when they're rebooting these things. Is it a lack of talent now? I have a hard time believing that too. Is it a lack of new ideas? Well, I don't believe that either. So I wonder what it is, what that is that makes things that used to be good bad now.
I would guess, just looking at stuff, is that if a refresh or reboot or remake or continuation is made because somebody has an idea and they love the original and they want to continue on and tell a different story, that's where you get a chance of having something great. A lot of the time, it seems like these remakes and reboots and all this stuff is the studio going, we need to make money. There is this property that's got a built in audience, so we're just going to make something. We don't know, we don't care if it's good or not. We just want to get something out there with the name because people recognize the name, so they'll pay money to watch it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I was gonna say laziness, but that's not the right word. It's probably just greed is the right word.
I think it's not only that, it's just some people want to destroy things. Um, I don't know if you saw that Henry Cavill just left The Witcher after the third season. He's been recast, but it sounds like he had a lot of problems with the actual showrunners because they don't care about any of the actual lore, actual stories, and stuff like that. So there was a lot of choices they made that he hated because he's a huge nerd, which is which is entertaining to think about. Here's this just massive specimen. He's Superman. He's built like a brick shit house, and he's a huge nerd. He paints Warhammer figures. He plays World of Warcraft. He builds his own PC.
Well, it shouldn't be that hard to believe because, as you know, I look like that, and I am
Okay.
also a nerd. And no one will ever know the difference if I am lying or not.
You got those spindly little legs that you got going on there.
Hey, 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 hey. Massive muscular legs is what you meant. Um, yeah, and on that note of I completely lost my train of thought because I was thinking about Henry Cavill's dreamy eyes.
I don't wanna wait for our lives to be over. I want to know right now, what will it be? I don't wanna wait for our lives to be over. Will it be? Yes, so will it be? Sorry.
I think the reason that a lot of that happens is that things are changed is this desire to just broaden things so that everyone can access. You know, the word inclusivity comes to mind, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it is a bad thing when it's at the expense of the product or at the expense of the core audience is a bad thing. Something loses its soul when it stops being what made it so that people loved it. So if you love The Witcher because of the lore, of course you're not going to like it when it's diluted so that an entire audience can watch it. Or if you love this show, The Tick, to bring it back to what we are talking about, if you love those elements that you described, that humor, the quirky, awkward humor, the animation style, the naivete of the character, the characterizations of everything, when that's diluted so it can fit an audience like me who didn't necessarily fall in love with that, so instead they're just trying to cast a wider net, it loses what made it what it is and it just becomes like everything else. And I think I tend to dislike things more that are generic than things that are bad. Because when things are bad, at least they're uniquely bad and there's something to enjoy about them. And you can see why maybe other people like them. But when things are just things, when all they are is just this product meant to be put on the shelf with all the rest of them that maybe grabs your eye, maybe it doesn't, that almost makes it worse because there's no soul in it. There's no passion in it.
I would say that that is the thing I have the most issue with most content now is that it's just content. We need to have content out. There needs to be something releasing every week so we keep people locked into these streaming services. They're always watching every week. And I would rather there be good stuff and bad stuff or different genres exist for a reason. I would rather have a show like this where it's not your cup of tea, but looking at it, that's fine. I wouldn't want the show changed so that you would like it because it would lose that specialness, that uniqueness that makes it odd and it just hits for me. I have an odd sense of humor, so I will be the first to admit I find things funny that many other people won't. And maybe looking back on it, maybe there's a reason that it has been kind of lost to time because maybe it didn't have that much of a following. I kind of find it hard to believe because most of the time when I talk to people that have actually seen it and they actually saw it at the time, they're like, that was a really good show. It's just the fact that a lot of people didn't see it because it was a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, despite me not loving this, I would never want it to be made for me because I understand why people like it. I think I'm gonna get soapboxy for a second here. People need to accept that things sometimes just aren't for them, and that's okay. Sometimes things are for other people; they're not for you. I just want more passion in stuff, and you can definitely tell that there's passion and love behind this show. And even if that means I don't like 90% of the stuff out there, I would at least like to see things that people care about being made rather than this throw it at the wall and see what sticks mentality that we have now.
Star Wars. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Got a little something in my throat.
Marvel.
Yeah, unfortunately, looking at both of those properties, kind of looking at reboots and remakes, there was some passion originally in both of those properties. And it has now become we just need to keep it going. We need to churn out more. I've heard it referred to as the Marvel sludge. It's just here's the standard thing they're coming out with, and it's going to fall into these things. Looking back at old shows like The Tick, I also started rewatching Daredevil, and it's just like, wow, there's a lot of effort put into this. People actually wanted to tell a story here, and it saddens me that they don't make those type of shows anymore, especially in the Marvel.
All right, and if that means we have less shows, that's not a problem for me because I already can't keep up as it is with all the stuff that comes out, nor that I want to. I'd rather have less stuff and more quality.
Unfortunately, quality is not something they're interested in, and that's frustrating. Is that a lot of shows and a lot of movies are skipping out on the actual writing and characterization and plot. Something that's kind of the easiest thing. It costs you the least amount of money to make, to write a story. It's like it's people just brainstorming, and kind of that's what I really like about this show is there's a lot of just really good writing in the characterization, and each one feels like their own separate character, and they have really great lines.
Yeah, I think that's all I got, unless you got anything else.
I think that's where we can end it.
So I just want to thank everybody for tuning into this, and I have to put in a little plug here at the end because I am the host of another show. It's actually a podcast called Full of Shit, and you can find it on Spotify. Just type in Full of Shit, the three words, and it's basically just a wacky show where we just discuss just about anything. And that typically comes out on Fridays.
And also you can find the link in the description of this video. You can join us again. We'll be releasing one every week. So if you enjoyed this, come back, recommend it to somebody, check out Full of Shit on Spotify, and we'll catch you next time.
One of the things we say on Full of Shit all the time is if you really want to help the show, take one of your friends' phones and then subscribe to this channel forcibly without them knowing. And then maybe one day they will stumble across it and they'll watch it, and you've planted the seeds. You've indoctrinated another fan.
Perfect.